with 3 guests. Yes, thank you, Hannelore, for launching the recording. I didn't announce it, but so the webinar will be recorded to enable colleagues, comrades who could not attend today to watch it. So to introduce our panelists, we have the pleasure to welcome Manirul Islam, who is the Deputy Director of the BILS, the Bangladesh Institute of Labor Studies. We are also very pleased to welcome Armin from the organization ZORA in Bosnia-Herzégovina. And Armin is also an active member of the Clean Clothes Campaign European Production Focus Group, who's handling with production in Europe. And we have the pleasure to host David Hachfeld, who is an expert of the NGO Public Eye, based in Switzerland, and also coordinator for the Clean Clothes Campaign in Switzerland. So this webinar is part of a project, a European project named Fashioning a Just Transition, who's supporting the Clean Clothes Campaign work to address the just transition question in the fashion industry. And one very, one upcoming phase of this project will be our launch of a manifesto, the Manifesto for Just Transition. And I invite everyone to follow the work that the Clean Clothes Campaign is doing in that direction. There is, by the way, another webinar following ours to present the latest draft of the manifesto. But so what brings us together today is the question of a living wage. Indeed, as part of this manifesto and as part of CCC advocacy work, living wages are a key component of workers' rights, and we consider it as a prerequisite for a just transition in the fashion industry. Before starting, I will say a few things. What do we mean by a living wage? We mean a fundamental right. We differentiate it from from the minimum wage, who is set by national governments and very often can be considered as a poverty wage. So the Clean Clothes Campaign defines a living wage as a wage that is sufficient to meet the basic needs for a worker and their family, and to provide some discretionary income. So that's our definition. And what we know of living wages practices in the fashion industry, we know it from a tool that we have. We monitor brands' practices on living wages since 2019 through the Fashion Checker, who's gathers the responses of a survey of more than 200 companies, and we can observe that living wages are far, far, far away from being paid to workers in the fashion industry. And you can see the items showing the wage gap between the minimum wage and the living wage in different countries. So this issue is an issue in the whole production of garment worldwide. So, though we do consider it as a prerequisite to a just transition in the sector, and we want to discuss this question with our different guests. I will now leave the floor to our first panelist, Manirul Islam, and I will share your presentation. Manirul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sana. So thank you. Good afternoon from Bangladesh. Yeah, I would like to welcome everyone in this session. So I think I only have 10 to 12 minutes, right, Sana? Oh, yeah, then I am going straight to the presentation. Yeah. So my first slide, I have a presentation. You can see. So at the very beginning, I would like to share a few quotes that will help explain the real wage and climate change context here in Bangladesh. Yeah. So, wage context. A garment worker from Gazipur, that is one of the garments producing zones here in Bangladesh, said last month, when I was working on a salary of 1,663 taka only, I still had 500 taka at the end of the month. Now there is nothing left. I will not eat beef. I will have to eat only potatoes and thin slices of bread. This is how life goes on. After the salary increase, the prices of all kinds of things have increased. As a result, life has become more difficult than before. Another quote, a group of trade union leaders in a consultation meeting in the last month from Sabar, those who you know Bangladesh, it's another industrial zones, garments producing zone. They told us that workers do not have money at the time of death. Why do we work for 20 years so that we can save 5 lakh taka and live comfortably in the next life? Now the situation is that after working for 20 years, we have to borrow money in the next life. I think this very well explain the context about the wage context here in Bangladesh. So with this, climate change related challenges have emerged as an additional burden with this context. Let me share one quote. The body weakens due to sweatening, gets sick. Accidents also happen due to illness because of the heat. 5, 7, 8, 10 people are absent from each time. Mr. Habib, RMG supervisor, said to us in meeting. So this is the context. We identified different kinds of diseases, illness that are basically associated with climate change risks, such as heat stroke, fainting while working, various fevers, diarrhea, chills, vomiting during work, etc., etc. So the environment and biodiversity around the factory is seriously degraded. This is our observation. So next slide, please, Sana. So now I would just share a few words about the context of climate change, green transition, and just transition. You know, there is global and national commitment for R&D industry-based decarbonization, and there is pressure from European Union and from other buyers for this. And many green transition efforts are being implemented continuously in Bangladesh, basically in the R&D sector, in response to this pressure, such as moving away from fossil fuel-based production to green or renewable sources, carbon trading, greening waste management system, environmental health protection, automation, strategies, and so on. So around 250 R&D factories have already transitioned to green factories. There are global decision and frameworks, you know, that any green transition is a just transition. Paris Climate Agreement says so. There is ILO guidelines, comprehensive guidelines on this, even Global Compact and others also say so. So this is the real global and national context. Now let me go directly to waste context here. So just transition and just waste, how trade unions perceive. In last 2012, in Bangladesh, all the national trade union federations, basically trade union federations who are associated with the R&D industry, they developed a trade union position paper for the R&D sector, and they clearly set their position on wages. I just around 27 national trade union federations, they adopted this position paper through a national convention, and two small paragraph I am just sharing with you what this trade union position paper say about wage. So low pay has no place in just transition and shared green future. A sustainable, livable planet cannot be achieved without ensuring a livable wage. A living wage should be at the core of any transition process. That is their goal. Second para, the ongoing transitions in the R&D industry have failed miserably to ensure a livable wage, adequate social dialogue, and institutional collaboration and workers' representation, which are key for just transition. So I think you can understand the real situation. So now let me go to another papers. It was basically in 2023, our government last reviewed our minimum wage for the RMG sector and updated the RMG wage and adapted at that time. In that time, we BILS, basically on behalf of trade unions in Bangladesh. Those are affiliated with the Industrial Bangladesh Council and also with the SCOP, so we prepared a trade position paper for them, background position paper for the work wage negotiation. There we define minimum wage. Here in Bangladesh, the official term is minimum wage, but it's almost same like the living wage. Here how we perceive minimum wage, it was a common perception that the lowest wage to be paid at a full-time workers. Wage cannot go beyond this. That was the consideration, and it is a minimum monthly wage, slightly above the above poverty line, cost of living for the worker and his dependents for the family members. It's not the decent wage, but it's beyond, slightly above the above poverty line. So this was the definition. Yeah, next slide, please. So that times our proposition was 3 living wage, keeping in mind the differences in cost of living in different cities. We proposed 3 minimum wages, one for Dhaka metropolitan city area, one for Chattogram metropolitan city area, and others for satellite cities, for other cities where RMG industries are situated. And we had another few calls that there should be 7 to 10% wage increase between 2 grades. AC increment benefits and work years should be realistically added. Dearness allowance should be calculated and paid after these 6 months. So these were our calls. So next slide, please. So this way we just calculate the minimum wage or living wage. From we consider food cost, we consider housing cost, we consider health cost, we consider education, we consider miscellaneous cost, we consider a savings, a minimum saving against a minimum saving. So all these, adding all this, we find the gross living costs. We then divide it by the income earners. Then we find the minimum wage or living wage that we propose for the national context. So next slide. So we consider 2 reference family options. First one worker, one his or her spouse and 2 child, and another one was 1 worker, one his spouse, and one child, and one is parent or in-law. It's basically considering a law here in Bangladesh. So this is based on BILS research. I am not explaining that very details. It contains in the slide. Basis was BILS research, the party did for Armin, Bangladesh. We consider household income and expenditure survey that was conducted in 2016. That was basically government administered, and Parents Care Act 2013. So considering all this, we proposed these 2 reference family to consider the wages. Yeah, next slide. So again, income earners, we consider 1.46 income earners. That means we divided the gross living costs by these income earners. Then we get the minimum, we define the minimum wage. It's basic. And household income and expenditure survey 2016, according to that, income earners was 1.33. So, but from our research, we get this finding. So I think, again, this was the minimum. And food cost, we consider 2,180 kilocalorie food per family per day. This is, we calculate based on WHO equation and the basal metabolic rate against age, weight, height, and size, and considering moderate physical activity levels for the workers, we consider. And for this, 2,188 kilocalorie food, we calculate BDT 110 taka each day for food costs, which was equivalent to around 1 USD that times. So the other calculation descriptions are here. I am not going there. Yeah, next slide. The next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the real calculation. I am not going details on this. So next slide, please. Yeah, housing cost, we considered a house that is walking distance. It's around 270 to 275 square feet. it has cement walls and cement floor, but does not leak roof, tin or maybe cement roof, health sanitation, and users not more than 8, kitchen clean, and users not more than 2 families. So it's like that. So health cost, we basically get health cost from our survey, and we find it was consistent with the household income and expenditure survey 2016. So next slide, please. So education cost, it's also we determined from our survey, and we just check with the national other data, and we find it's consistent with the government survey and other ones. So we was, and for miscellaneous cost, we basically consider a cost for personal care like laundry, baby feeder, soap, toothpaste, toothbrush, coconut oil, snow powder, hair clipper, lipstick, nail polish, razor, etc. Guested travel and communication cost, guested entertainment cost, clothing and footwear cost, for furniture and household equipment, and these are. And we basically followed the government calculation for this. That was just explained in the household income and expenditure survey. They take this and they consider 14.5.8% cost for all consumption costs, and we consider the same calculation for determining miscellaneous costs. And for savings, we just consider 5% savings. You can understand this is the lowest. So we every place we just consider the minimum, and it was the legal contest. I am not explaining our labor policy, our Bangladesh Labor Act, the constitutions. It's the way that trusted. We consider the way calculating our minimum wage. We consider also international some standards. So other consideration was that so actual wage taking, what basically, so their workers are working a couple of hours extra overtime work every day, and they are getting paid. So what was their wage taking? Actually, we considered that currency devaluation, we consider inflation adjustment, we consider export earning ratio per worker, considered whether it increase or decrease over time, employers capacity, minimum wage in competitive economies countries, and minimum wage fixation process in other countries we consider. So next slide. So we also consider some other, you find in this slide, you can find some other calculations of minimum wage for Bangladesh's RMG. Our calculation was average 21,415 BD. This is Bangladeshi taka. Considering per capita income here in Bangladesh and applying same method that we consider, we find it should be 68,343 taka. And Asian floor wage estimation of RMG sector minimum wage for Bangladesh is 50,104 taka. Global Living Wage Coalition has estimated figure for 21,648 taka for Bangladesh. And upper poverty line wage for Bangladesh, we consider from government, based on government data, according to household income and expenditure survey, upper poverty line income in urban Bangladesh is 5,180 taka per person per month. So applying our methods of calculation, we find the upper poverty line wage should be 14,214 taka. So next slide. So finally, after wage negotiation, Bangladesh government declared a minimum wage in November 2023, and it was effective from December 2023, and the minimum wage was fixed 12,500 taka per month. So next slide, please. So mind the gaps here. I would like to say what is the difference? You please say. Considering upper poverty line wage for Bangladesh, we considered the newly declared minimum wage was 14% less. Considering Global Living Wage Coalition estimation, it was 73% less. Considering Asia floor wage estimation, it was 325% less. And considering current per capita income in Bangladesh, it was 447% less. And considering our calculation, it was 71% less. So next slide. So considering all these few key challenges, I would like to share. This would be my final slide. So we would like to say the wage here is most unjust here for Bangladesh, and it's below the upper poverty line cost of living here in Bangladesh for the RMG workers. No flexibility to address climate change process. So it's just extra burden to them. No flexibility to address causes from green transition process. Yeah. Irregular formation of the wage board. The wage board, basically, it's supposed to form every after 5 years, but sometimes it's 6 years, 7, every after 3 years, but sometimes it's after 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, something like that. Representation of workers and employers. This is not the democratic process. There is always political biases. And government affiliated person basically are represented, selected for the wage boards every time. This is the common scenario. There is inadequate groundwork, no systematic data generation efforts, excessive heat and hotness, climate and environmental migration, serious inefficiency in energy, water and chemical uses, massive water, air and sound pollution, and poor waste management practices are consistently prevalent both at workplace, workers' living place, and inside factories. This we find from our research, from a current research. These are causing serious health vulnerabilities to workers. Leave absence, income and capacity loss, and productivity loss are frequent. And grievance mechanisms to climate change and environmental causes are ineffective, and adaptation initiatives inadequate to zero. So these are the major challenges we like to conclude from Bangladesh part. I think I have taken, I'm in my time limit. So thank you very much for patience hearing. With these many words, I would like to conclude here.
Many, many thanks, Manirul, for this very insightful presentation, giving very, very strong elements on the situation in Bangladesh. We have followed this minimum wage process from the Clean Clothes campaign perspective and tried to support our Bangladeshi unions partners, and followed also the wave of repression that workers have faced after they raised their voices for an increased minimum wage. But looking into this also in the light of the environmental perspective and climate change issues is very insightful. So thanks a lot. As we plan, we leave the floor to the audience if there are like clarification question. And there I look at Hannelore. Maybe you have access to the chat and can tell if there were questions raised already.
Yes, so there has been one clarification question and one question that we will keep to the end of this webinar because it's a more general question, I believe. So the first one to Mr. Manirul is, you mentioned a salary of 1,663 taka in the first quote, but the minimum wage is at 12,500 now. Can you explain this discrepancy?
Yeah, exactly. I just quote from one worker that she was just telling in one interview that around 15 years before, I would have been paid 1,663 taka. That was the minimum wage that times. So that times, even after maintaining all the cost of living, she could have saved 100 or 200 taka each. But she was just saying, but now I paid 12,500 taka, but still there is no option for save because I am always some shortage at the final days in every month. So that was the quote. So I think it explains.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. And yeah, we'll keep the second question for later on. So I will leave the floor to Armin to pursue the discussion.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting me to this discussion. My name is Armin. Sorry. You can hear me, yes? Yeah, my name is Armin Sestic. I come from Association ZORA in Bosnia-Herzégovina. And I want to bring a perspective from a garment-producing country in Europe. My main point today will be very straightforward. If workers are not paid enough to live with dignity, then there is no real just transition, period. There may be a green transition, there may be new standards, new report obligations, new sustainability language, but it is not just if the people doing the work are still stuck in poverty. For us, this is not a theoretical question. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, the garment and footwear sector is still an important employer, and large majority of workers are women. So when we talk about low wages in the sector, we are talking about women carrying the weight of production, family survival, and unpaid care work at the same time. And even where minimum wages have gone up, that still does not mean workers have reached anything close to a living wage. This is a key difference we have to keep stressing. A legal minimum wage, we can still work in permanent insecurity. It can still mean constant calculations, how to pay food, rent, electricity, transport, school costs, medicine. So employment is not enough. The question is whether work allows a dignified life. This is also why the Europe floor wage discussion has been so important. It challenges, well, when we speak about just transition in Europe, it has to look at itself. You know, discussions of Europe floor wage have been important. It challenges the idea that made in Europe automatically means fair. We know that is simply not true. Europe also has production models built on cheap labor, weak bargaining power, and pressure on suppliers. So when we speak about justice in transition, Europe has to look at itself too. And then the climate changes makes this all even more urgent. For workers, climate impact is not some distant environmental topic. It is very practical. It means rising food prices, rising energy costs, transport problems, extreme heat, floods, stress at home, stress at work, and more pressure on families. If you are already living on a wage that does not cover your needs, then every climate-related shock hits harder. You have no cushion, no savings, no breathing space. That is why I think we need to say clearly that the living wage is also part of a climate resilience. It gives worker at least some capacity to cope, to plan, and to participate in a change rather than simply being crushed by it. I also think we need to be honest about how transition is currently discussed in the fashion industry. Too often it is discussed in technical terms: materials, emissions, compliance, reporting, traceability, accountability, all of that matters. But if wages are missing from the conversation, then the cost of transition will once again be pushed onto workers. We have seen this before. Brands with lower prices, faster production, and higher standards all at the same time. And when the pressure moves down the supply chain, it usually lands on workers through low wages, work intensity, and insecurity. So for me, a just transition in fashion has to include a few basic things. It has to include living wage as a real benchmark, not just a long-term aspiration. It has to include freedom of association and collective bargaining, because workers need actual power. It has to include responsible purchasing practices, because brands cannot demand impossible prices and then speak about justice. And it has to include public policies and due diligence rules that stop rewarding business models based on cheap labor. In our work in Bosnia-Herzegovina, including through discussion linked to the Clean Clothes campaign Euro Floor Wage, we have tried to make exactly this point. Cheap labor is not a development strategy, and it is definitely not just transition strategy. So the message I want to leave today is simple. We should stop talking about wages and sustainability as if they are two separate issues. They are deeply connected. If workers cannot live from the wages, they cannot carry the burden of transition. And if they are expected to carry that burden anyway, then the transition is not just. Living wage is not everything, but it's the foundation. Without it, justice in transition remains only a slogan. With it, workers at least have a fighting chance to be a part of shaping a better future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Armin, for this powerful message. I look at Hannelore. I don't know if there were clarification questions, but here, I mean, we have now an understanding of the perspective from a European production country.
No
which broadens
clarifications
this.
in
Okay.
the chat, so we can carry on for now. But if
And
you
I'm
have
sorry.
questions, post them in the chat, of course.
I'm sorry about the cat in the background, you know.
We missed it, actually.
I was loud then. Okay.
Okay. So to pursue, I will leave the floor to David, and yeah, to the Clean Clothes campaign, a roadmap for a living wage. I think you share your screen yourself. Yeah, perfect. Merci. You're on mute, David. Sorry.
All right, welcome from my side. I'm going to briefly introduce a CCC position paper called the CCC Living Wage Roadmap, which is outlining the position of CCC. And I will then later on elaborate a bit on the relation between living wages and just transition. Just as an introduction for those who are not familiar with the Clean Clothes Campaign network, the network works for now more than 30 years to achieve better working conditions and justice in the fashion industry. And of course, wages have been at the center right from the beginning and still are. So our calls to work on living wages date back a few decades now, and we continue to uphold this as one of our main priorities of work. And what we do in this field is, at one hand, very specific support for wage struggles. It can be at factories in specific situations where there is wage theft. It can be on the national level, like as a colleague was explaining this living wage, this minimum wage struggle in Bangladesh, about the minimum wage revision in 2023. This is something where we as a network engage in campaigning and support work with our trade unions and our civil society organizations. But what we also do is to do some advocacy and awareness raising work around the cause of living wage. And we monitor what companies are doing, what governments are doing, and so on. So from this background, we developed a first living wage roadmap about 15 years ago. And we published it as expectations to brands at a time when the word living wage was, from companies, still rarely used. Some mentioned it, but it was not a frequent term. And we, together with many of our allies from Asian Flow Wage, from many other networks, we were actually pushing a living wage agenda as a different thing from minimum wage struggles that we have seen before. And I would say we have seen some successes in the discourse. So now, actually, many are talking about living wages, and there are in the sector a couple of voluntary initiatives that also endorse a commitment to ensure living wages. But while the discourse has developed, in reality, living wage gaps have not changed much. Of course, we have seen wage development, as in Bangladesh, in nominal terms. So now in Bangladesh, minimum wages are not there anymore at 1,600, but at 12,000. But if you look at the real development, so if you account for the increased cost of living, we see that a living wage is still only roughly 1/3 of what people would need. And in some countries, the gap is even higher. So this is something we observe. We observe many companies and also some politicians are talking about living wages, but in practice, too little is happening. And also we have seen a tendency of companies hiding behind commitments and initiatives, kind of as a fig leaf, to say, yeah, we're doing something, but we have seen that actually progress has rather slowed down in the last 10 years also. Therefore, we have readjusted our priorities and expectations and published this as a revised roadmap. I will send you the links later on so you can go to the documents yourself. What we do is a slight change. While 15 years ago, we were mainly calling on companies to live up to their business accountability duties, we must say we have not much confidence left that companies will, on a voluntary base, substantially work towards living wages. We still demand it from them. We still think it's their duty, and this is our expectation to any company. But we feel that we need a clearer binding regulation and binding agreements secured through collective bargaining to actually change something in the industry in broader terms and ensure that living wages are paid. Therefore, we have shifted a bit towards enforceable agreements. Let me say a few things just to give you examples. I'm not going to read you through the whole roadmap because it's quite large in scope and has various topics. You can see broadly the topics here, expectations that we have towards brand and retailers and expectations that we have towards governments. Just a few examples. For example, so our main expectation remains that we expect from companies to publish a comprehensive living wage strategy with a time-bound plan and time-bound targets. Because we have seen many companies saying, yeah, we're doing something on living wages, but never in a way that you can actually measure any progress. So it's just showing some activities, but not showing really impact, not having clear time-bound target. And the point is, we now have 2 generations of workers who already are working in this sector since the first promises of companies on living wages, and still living wages are not there. This shows to us that we need to have clear time-bound roadmaps showing how to close living wage gaps in an overseeable time period. The second point is that we think we need more transparency with information about purchasing prices and product costing. And this should go to workers' representatives. because we have trade unions being active in some factories, organizing, trying to do collective bargaining. And we think that brands should clearer share with them information on their purchasing practices, purchasing prices, and so on, so that this information can also be used in collective bargaining, and that the room that is already there can be used by trade unions to negotiate towards higher wages, but that it also becomes clear that where prices are not enough to pay for living wages, and we know this is the case in this industry fixed on low prices, that it's possible to then campaign and do advocacy on increasing prices. A third expectation we have is that companies have some freedom to decide where they source, where they produce, if they produce in own facilities, in outsourced facilities, and so on. And through these decisions, they also have an influence on wages, because they would be able to prioritize in their sourcing decisions living wage workplaces, or workplaces where there is an active process towards living wages. So this is another expectation that we are putting forward. And the last examples concern an expectation towards policy and regulators. And we think that we need to have a clearer regulation and monitoring of purchasing practices and purchasing prices, because we have seen that in this industry, buyers often impose price levels on suppliers that do not even cover the cost of a sustainable production. And this is something where we believe this cannot be just left to the market. It's something where we need more regulation to ensure that the worst forms of price competition becomes forbidden. So this, just to give you an impression of just 4 elements of about 100 elements of this roadmap. Of course, the roadmap is not a document to read through probably in one day. It's more a compendium of demands as expectations. And this is nothing that we believe is something easy to achieve, but it is something that we believe is necessary to do, and therefore belongs on the agenda of every corporation and every politician involved in decision-making around this industry. But let's make the link to just transition, because obviously living wages is necessary to fulfill a human right to a fair income, and also for justice purpose, to provide that workers earn their fair share from the products that are sold with their work. But when it comes to just transition, we also need to acknowledge that the wage is one element, but in practice, we need a far more complex development of the perspective on labor in this industry. Because currently we have a paradigm saying there is a normality of cheap, monotonous labor, and it can be exploited as much as possible or as much as laws allow. And we think that this needs to be shifted towards a change of perception about the structure of labor, and ensuring that decent work comes with a purpose, that skills are valued and knowledge. And what do we mean by this? If you look into labor standards at the moment, you will see that most labor standards that are there by companies, but also by law, basically they try to say labor should not kill you or should not make you seriously sick. But it's nothing about the quality of labor. It's nothing about time budgets that people have. And we believe that we need to include this in our conversation and not say that something like 60 working hours are kind of normal in the industry. This is not normal, at least not normal for a work or a life where people have also other perspectives on what they want to do, and especially in transition processes where people need also time to adapt to new situations, to maybe work in their communities for climate transformation, for adaptation, to work in their skill developments, to invest time in education and culture, and to have actually the perspective of not just observing transition as something that it's happening, but to have the time to influence it and to become a shaper of this transformation. And therefore, when it comes to targets, yes, pay living wages is a very central element. But we need also to look into working hours. We need to look into freedom of association and the rights to also shape processes on just transition. And this does not consider only wages and many more. So these are examples of targets that we have published in a report by Public Eye, One Earth Fashion, just to make you aware that our perspectives on living wages and just transition actually go beyond living wages, but they incorporate a whole different vision of what work should be in this industry. I will close this by providing this example just to show a bit the order of magnitude that we think is needed. I told you before that to close a living wage gap, on average globally, wages would need to triple, more or less. In some countries less, in some countries more. But actually a living wage is just the start of a discussion on a fair wage. And on the long run, we would like to have wages going even beyond. So a living wage should not be the final target. It's actually the start of the zone of negotiation towards fair wages. And also, we just do not want to have workers earning a living wage in the same inhuman working conditions, time pressure at work, and so on, where they currently are. We think in order to have a transition industry, we need better products. We also need better conditions of work. We need that people have time to do their tasks, so to produce high quality items, and they need, and workers need to be able to do this not in 60 hours and also not in 48 hours, but probably in an area between 30 and 40 hours, so that people have time also for their families, for political work, for community work, and so on. And therefore, when it comes to changing the labor costing, it's not just about tripling at wages, it's much more what we need. We need to have a far bigger chunk of the value added going into labor. And last but not least, just transition should not just limit to the manufacturing at the factories. When it comes to garments, many garments are produced out of cotton. And we know that many garment farmer families do not have a living income that it's enough for them to live in dignity. And therefore, we also need to account for higher raw material prices in order that it's possible also for cotton farm families to earn a living income. So also here, we need a pass-through of more value added towards the producers upstream in the supply chain. So this is just to give you a perspective of our transformative vision and to say, yes, if we would like to have workers engaged as actors in transformation, then yes, they need a higher income in order to be resilient also for transformation processes. They need social security in order to be protected during times of transformation. But they also need the time to organize, to collective bargaining, and for political work in order to make their communities, their countries also fit for transformation in this environmental and climate crisis. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, David, to complete this this presentation with all these elements, both on the CCC roadmap and the just transition relation to wages. I would, before opening up for questions, maybe Manirul or Armin, you want to react to what was said after what you intervened. I don't know if you want to complete your word with something before we open up for questions from the audience.
I mean, we are all part of the same team and same idea, and what David said and what Mr. Manirul said all resonates with us. So it's completely normal that we kind of correlate and benefit each other's visions in regards to the living wage and just transition. So yeah, good choice of panelists who have sort of the same idea and same drive towards the decent work and the justice for workers. Yeah.
Thank you, Armin. Manirul, would you like to say something? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David. It's good proposition. Yeah. So I would like just to add one thing. So that roadmap should be collective. That should be the emphasis, because collective, and there should be shared responsibility from all parties, including the brands and players. You know, every time here in Bangladesh, our experience is that whenever there is a wage review and wage increase, yeah, brands always promises they will share, but finally we don't see they're taking the responsibility or sharing anything. And we reviewed the brands code of contacts, several brands code of contacts earlier, before around 10 years before. There was no code of conduct, something like that, that they will ensure living wage in their sourcing factories. But now, because of our collective works, now you will find in every code of conduct, there is at least one code that is they will ensure living wage in their sourcing factories. But you see, like Bangladesh or other countries, we know, there is a government declared minimum wage. So how can brands ensure living wage in their sourcing factories? We don't know. So that's why we're just telling there should be a collective approach, including employers, government, and brands. There should be commitment and shared responsibility how they will ensure a living wage in their sourcing factories and in the entire countries. That is one. Number two is that we should emphasize now on an enabling approach. Enabling approach means, yeah, some factories, okay, from brands and employers, this should not be the relationship like patron and client. Something will be just the boss and another will be just following orders, something not like that. So there should be like that. You must implement a living wage in your factory. So other environment, other stakeholders would help, and there should be roadmap, and everyone's responsibility should be identified how they will help you. It's not something punishing them. Okay, some sourcing factory you are not ensuring living wage, so you will be punished, or your order will be cancelled. So something not like that, but a shared responsibility. Okay, we must ensure a living wage. So let's decide whose roles should be hot, and collectively we will ensure a living wage for the entire industry. So up to this, and another question was that to me, is there any scope that government will increase here in Bangladesh, go for increasing wage for the RMZ workers? I think. So my answer is no. There is basically a legal provision that government will review minimum wage after is 3 to 5 years. So until and unless there is a serious workers unrest, we don't see that government will take any initiative here in Bangladesh to go for minimum wage review. So with this small words I would like to proceed. Yeah. Yeah, what being, sir?
Thank you to all of you for your thoughts on the questions. We will open up for questions. I think there are some in the chat, and I think I saw some hands raised, but I don't see it fully. Yeah, I leave you, Hannelore, maybe introduce the question.
Yes, I'll go for a very quick summary. Your presentations were very complete, just to get our heads wrapped around it. And now we have some questions. It also came to our attention that the participants cannot pose their questions in the regular chat, but you can post your questions in the Q&A section that you can also find on the bottom of your screen. So please still do so while I give the quick summary, and then we go towards all the questions. So we learned today that the minimum wage is not just a living wage, it's not always a living wage, and workers need to be able to save up for unforeseen circumstances like decent housing, food, medicine, and many other aspects in their life that they might need. Women are also carrying the weight of production in the textile industry and are experiencing the most effects of climate change. We also learned today that just regular employment is not enough. All workers deserve to live a dignified life. If you have no reserves, you cannot anticipate to climate change that is coming your way and thus making the transition unjust. Companies should prioritize living wages in all their sourcing decisions. Policies need to be put in place to ensure purchasing practices are regulated and monitored to prevent suppliers not being able to cover the cost of production. And a living wage is certainly a prerequisite for achieving a just transition, but there is more to it. We need a general better and decent working conditions for workers worldwide in order to speak of a true just transition. So now we will go to our first question, which is addressed to David. When developing the new roadmap, did you come across some good practices of collective bargaining or a company which has developed such a comprehensive living wage strategy? Any valuable lessons which we can draw on?
Not really, to be honest, not of the bigger companies. So we assessed a bit which companies had living wage activities and strategies. So H&M, for example, for many years had a living wage roadmap, also aiming towards paying living wages to a substantial part of workers. We have seen that this ended somehow, the commitment was reduced, and now it just turned into something very general. Also, other bigger companies such as Inditex and so on have claims to work towards living wages, but nothing, I would say, is a comprehensive time-bound living wage strategy. We have seen these companies organizing in MSIs, such as the ACT initiative, which involves also some global unions. But for now, we haven't seen any results. There is now a small result in Cambodia that resulted basically in a wage increase of less than 10%. We need to see if this develops further, but at the moment, I would say very little progress. There are some alternative, very small brands who try to do something better, but are still struggling because they also, in a very competitive market, are working in niches, trying to do something better here. But yeah, to be honest, quite frustrating searching into companies' practices for real transformative practices.
Thank you, David. I do not see any further questions in the chat, so if you still have them, please go ahead.